When a popular cop went missing, it sparked a media frenzy. But in the sprawling labyrinth of central London, finding him felt like an impossible task. Investigators traced his every move, before the trail went cold on a road in the south of the city. Meanwhile, the sickly sweet aroma of bubblegum air freshener did little to mask the growing stench coming from a nearby apartment block. A putrid odour that lured police into discovering a murder plot quite literally lifted from an episode of Breaking Bad. But nothing could have prepared them for the nightmare waiting for them on the other side of that apartment door. Hello and welcome to the Little Shop of Crime. My name is Steve, and in store today we have a half-eaten rib, a psychedelic BDSM party, and a killer who reenacts his favourite TV show. It's a shocking story of a man who goes so far off the rails he's unable to find his way back on again. So if you're interested to know more, stick around. This is the murder of Gordon Semple. Today's story begins in the Apennine Mountains of Tuscany, Italy, in the small rural commune of San Marcello Pistoiese. Stefano Brizzi was born there in 1966. He was the youngest of 3 siblings, and like most who lived there, his family were devout Catholics. His uncle even became a local priest. At the age of 15, Brizzi realised he was gay, but he hid it, afraid of the reactions of those around him. Now we're talking the early 80s, and homosexuality wasn't exactly accepted in strict Catholic circles. He felt he couldn't live freely as a gay man without facing judgment. And his sexuality contradicted his own deep faith. He was tormented by Catholic guilt. He believed he was living in sin, and he began to think he was evil. At the earliest opportunity, Brizzi moved to the nearest big city and enrolled at Florence University, one of the most prestigious institutions in Italy. He was highly intelligent, and he earned 2 degrees, one in philosophy and another in computing. After graduating, he stayed in the city and worked as a computer programmer throughout his 20s and 30s. In 2008, at the age of 42, Stefano Brizzi was diagnosed with hepatitis C and as HIV positive. In his words, this was a death sentence. But modern treatments kept the diseases at bay, and in 2012 he was offered a dream IT job in London with the investment bank Morgan Stanley and a salary of £70,000. Moving to London was both a new start and a complete culture shock for Brizzi. The city was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. He felt liberated, away from the rigid set of values that had governed his life up to this point. For the first time, he could be openly gay without fear of judgment, and he indulged. He worked hard and played hard, but with the party scene came his eventual experimentation with various illicit substances, GHB, ketamine, and eventually his personal favourite, crystal meth. He quickly became hooked and began smoking it every single day. This was the turning point in his life, an addiction that ultimately consumed him, until he lost his lucrative job in February of 2015, and this is when things really started to spiral out of control for Stefano Brizzi. He became more and more introverted, started isolating himself. Eventually he turned nocturnal, rarely leaving his London apartment during the day. He covered all the windows so he could live in perpetual darkness, and kept smoking meth. That's when things took a dark turn, and he began writing letters to Satan. He watched the TV series Breaking Bad on loop. He was obsessed with talking about the show online. It became another addiction, and the lines between reality and fiction began to blur. He saw himself in the show's lead character, even began to model his appearance on him. Eventually Brizzi did try to get help. He joined a meth support group, but he upset other members when he turned up in a Breaking Bad t-shirt. Not exactly the most fitting attire for a meth help group, given the main character cooks it. At one point he even held a funeral for his addiction, complete with a tiny coffin for his meth, and a ritualistic Catholic-style ceremony. His attempt at burying his addiction by quite literally burying the drugs, but it was futile. In a post on Facebook he wrote, "Okay, so now I keep watching my Breaking Bad episodes, but I still feel like something is missing, like a dessert or something. Something to comfort me and give me pleasure. The thought just keeps nagging at me, again and again, in the back of my mind, mercilessly, obsessively. What if I did it?" He was soon digging the miniature grave back up again, and he slipped back into a life of total isolation. Eventually, his only social interaction was through gay dating apps, which led to casual sex. But these hookups evolved into regular, full-blown chemsex parties, prolonged sadomasochistic orgies fueled by psychedelic drugs and other mind-bending narcotics. Which leads us to the beginning of the end for Stefano Brizzi. April 1st, 2016. In an effort to host his latest chemsex party, he began reaching out on Grindr, the popular gay dating app. His profile name was Dom SE1. He connected with the profile of Dominion London, a submissive man seeking to be restrained and dominated. He messaged Brizzi, saying he was free now for a hot, dirty, sleazy session. This man's real name was Gordon Semple. Gordon Archibald Semple was born in Inverness, Scotland in 1956. As soon as he turned 18, he moved to London to work for a bank before joining the Metropolitan Police Force in 1983, at the age of 27. There he remained for the next 30 years, eventually becoming a constable in London's antisocial behaviour unit. Gordon lived in Greenhithe, in the nearby county of Kent, where he shared a home with Gary, his partner of 25 years. The couple allegedly had a somewhat open relationship. Gordon was an exceptional police officer, but he led a secret life, fueled by his own addiction, casual encounters involving kinky sex. He was a prolific user of Grindr, and it wasn't uncommon for him to slip out of the office for a hookup while on duty. Most of his colleagues didn't even know he was gay. In the end, his Grindr profile had more than 700 pages of enthusiastic messages to other men. But it's important to remember that this aspect of his life didn't define him. Gordon Semple was still a decent cop and a kind and beloved family man, really close to his brother Ronnie, and he was described as popular, very outgoing and friendly, a happy-go-lucky kind of guy. As an officer, he was really community-focused, and he regularly took part in charity fundraisers. And that again leads us to April 1st, 2016, which was also the beginning of the end for Gordon Semple. Activity on Gordon's Grindr profile shows he was looking for a casual hookup that day. Unfortunately for him, it was the same day Brizzi was organising his latest sordid party. Shortly after 3 p.m, Gordon arrived at the Peabody Estate, a complex of apartments in Southwark, South London. He climbed these stairs to door number 5, the home of Stefano Brizzi. Gordon was the first to show up for the party. At 4 p.m, both men's Grindr apps showed they were trying to get others to come over to Brizzi's apartment to participate in the activities. No one accepted the invite, so the pair began a chemsex party for 2. But at 7 p.m, one of the invitees showed up unexpectedly and rang the doorbell. Brizzi's voice came over the intercom. "Hello, sorry, we're having kind of a situation here. Someone fell ill, but we're taking care of it, so our party is cancelled." Gordon and his partner Gary had plans later that evening. They'd visit a local pub before they went home to watch a TV show they'd recorded, and they'd share a shepherd's pie that was already waiting in the fridge. But Gordon didn't arrive home. Frantic with worry, Gary called his phone 18 times within an hour and a half. He was reported missing the following morning. Investigators began to retrace his steps. April 1st, 2016 was a Friday, and Gordon was on duty in plain clothes. He left his home in Dartford and made his way to a meeting inside the 5-star Shangri-La Hotel in the Shard. Throughout the morning, he sent messages to strangers on Grindr in the hope of arranging some casual sex. The hotel's security manager was an acquaintance of Gordon's, and he witnessed the officer leave the 95-storey tower at around 12:30 p.m. What he did for the next couple of hours remains unclear, but he eventually took a tube train, captured on CCTV arriving at Blackfriars Station, just half a mile from the Shard, at around 3 p.m. In the footage, he's glued to his phone. He was feverishly sending salacious messages to Stefano Brizzi. He then walked south, captured again on CCTV cameras. The last sighting was just minutes later, on Great Guildford Street, before the trail went cold, a stone's throw from the Peabody estate. They'd got so close. On April 3rd, the Metropolitan Police launched a missing person appeal for their colleague. He'd been gone for 2 days. Thousands joined a Facebook group set up by Gordon's niece. There was an enormous outpouring of love from those worried about him, desperate to find him. As time passed, fear for Gordon's safety escalated. Police divers searched a stretch of the River Thames close to where he was last seen. They found nothing. 3 days passed without a whiff of Gordon's whereabouts. That was until April 4th, when an incredible stench began to spill from Brizzi's apartment block on the Peabody estate. Neighbours initially suspected blocked drains, but they began to worry one of the tenants might have passed away. Steve Harris, who could smell it from his own apartment 2 floors above Brizzi's, decided to investigate. He followed the putrid stench to apartment 5, home of Stefano Brizzi. Scented candles were burning outside his door, but they were unable to mask the odour. Steve opened the letterbox and was met with the unmistakable smell of death, and as he was peering through, Brizzi opened the door.
Well, as he's walked past, and he's opened up the door to me. Bang, now I'm on my own now. I said, excuse me, mate. I said, there's been a complaint about a smell in the block. And his reaction was simply, sorry about that, mate. I'm cooking for a friend. That's the reason why I put the candle outside.
3 days later, April 7th, and the repulsive stench lingered on, only now it was different. It was accompanied by what was described as an overpowering smell of chemicals. Steve Harris confronted Brizzi again, who answered his door apparently as cool as a cucumber, and nonchalantly gave the same excuse. I'm cooking for a friend. Steve called the emergency services. Paramedics arrived and immediately identified the smell of rotting flesh. They alerted the police. 2 female officers arrived shortly after. Stefano Brizzi was evidently high when he opened the door, wearing nothing but a pair of bright pink Speedos and aviator sunglasses. He made an immediate confession. I've killed a police officer. Satan told me to do it. I promised Satan that I would kill at the first opportunity. I've cut him up. Nothing could have prepared the 2 officers for the unimaginable horror inside the apartment. They entered into an atmosphere of pungent chemicals and rotting flesh. An assortment of chemical bottles littered the hallway. As they entered the bathroom, they found the floor coated in slime, described as resembling the residue from raw meat. The bathtub was filled with a blue-green liquid, which turned out to be sodium hydroxide and hydrochloric acid, a potent chemical cocktail, but not quite potent enough to completely dissolve the globules of fat and flesh that were still floating in it. The toilet was repeatedly flushing, choking on what Brizzi described as the flabbery bits that wouldn't dissolve, alongside some organs he'd attempted to flush away. There were a couple of large bin bags on the bathroom floor, and one of the officers opened one to discover a human hand and what appeared to be part of a spine inside. Another contained a pelvis. Understandably, she was left shaken by what she'd seen. Stefano Brizzi had been trying to dispose of the body for days. Scattered throughout the apartment were plastic buckets containing more dismembered body parts, including part of Gordon Semple's head. It will probably come as no surprise to hear that both police officers suffered severe emotional trauma at having found their colleague's body in this state. In the kitchen, things somehow took an even more sinister turn, when it became evident that Brizzi had eaten parts of Gordon. His DNA was found on various kitchen utensils, including a cooking pot, the blades of a blender, a chopping board, and even on some chopsticks. There was blood in a tea strainer, and pools of human fat inside the oven. There was a burnt leg, which Brizzi later went on to admit he'd tried to, in his words, roast. And there was even a bite mark on one of Gordon's dismembered ribs, which had been discarded in a bin. Police also found a copy of the Satanic Bible on Brizzi's computer, along with a notebook filled with handwritten messages addressed to the devil. Stefano Brizzi was arrested on suspicion of murder and taken to Lewisham police station. There he requested to take a shower, since his bathtub had been unusable for days.
Is there anything you can tell me about what you did between the 1st and the 7th, before you were arrested?
No comment.
After an initial no-comment interview, Stefano Brizzi soon opened up. In fact, he seemed eager to talk. It actually all began the night before he met Gordon Semple. Brizzi had been stood up by another man on Grindr, and he stayed up all night, so the following day he was tired and frustrated. He smoked an enormous amount of meth in the hours leading up to the fateful Friday afternoon. He told the officers that while he and Gordon were having sex, he suddenly decided to choke his guest to death, because, he said, the devil told him to. My psychologist says crystal meth causes psychosis. I was raised a Catholic. Being gay was evil, and the devil, so I've been into Satan. A very clear voice said, you must kill, you must kill, you must kill. It's not uncommon for killers to claim they were possessed by Satan, but Brizzi was disturbingly sincere. Even when reminded of his rights, he insisted this was the truth and could be used as evidence. He said the reason he turned away the unexpected guest at his door was because at that moment he was right in the middle of strangling Gordon. He only realised Gordon was a police officer when he rummaged through his belongings and found his badge. He then panicked and just consumed more drugs to escape the reality of what he'd done. He spent 3 days high in his confined, dark apartment with Gordon Semple's decomposing body. 3 days until his neighbour questioned him about the smell. After he was confronted, Brizzi's narcotic haze began to pass, and he came crashing back down to reality with a fresh wave of panic. Time was running out. He knew he had to find a way to dispose of the body. In episode 2 of Breaking Bad, Walter White instructs Jesse to go to a hardware store to purchase a specific type of plastic bin, capable of withstanding acid, so they can dissolve the body of a rival dealer. This evidently struck a chord with Stefano Brizzi. He reflected on his actions. I think I was inspired by the idea. I took whatever was there, thinking, maybe I can dissolve him. Brizzi made a trip to a nearby hardware store, where he was captured on CCTV. This was on April 5th. 4 days after he killed Gordon, and the day after he was first confronted about the smell. He bought a 3-in-1 saw set to dismember Gordon, perforated metal sheets that he used to grate the flesh from the bones. He bought heavy-duty scissors, a knife, and a vast assortment of chemicals, carpet cleaner, bleach, and bottles of acid. And just like Walter White advised, he bought a number of large plastic buckets. At one point he even tried one out for size, to see how much of a person could fit inside. He then set about trying to dismember and dissolve Gordon Semple. Meanwhile, he made efforts to cover his tracks, with messages to Gordon's Grindr account, to make it look as if the officer had left his apartment alive, and to throw any investigation off the scent. Brizzi admitted to the officers that he thought he was going to get away with it. He said, "I had nearly finished the job, but I took a shot of meth. I was going to finish the job today. As you can see, this man was a very big man, and all I had left is 2 buckets. When Brizzi realised the acid wasn't as effective as he'd hoped, he resorted to simply throwing some body parts into the River Thames. One of Gordon's feet was later found washed up on a riverbank. More body parts were also found dumped in the communal bins of the Peabody estate, and pieces of Gordon's remains were also recovered from the drainage system in Brizzi's apartment block. A psychiatric evaluation of Stefano Brizzi found no reason for a defence of diminished responsibility. He was clinically sane, and his trial began in October 2016 at the Old Bailey. For the first time, Gordon Semple's family had to sit through the awful story and grisly details of what had happened to their loved one. Brizzi crumbled under the pressure. He had to be removed several times because he was hyperventilating and sobbing loudly in the dock. He denied murder, but admitted to the crime of obstructing a coroner. The story he presented in court was entirely different from his interview. Now he claimed Gordon Semple had died in a sex game gone wrong. He told the court he'd been using a collar and leash on the police officer, and he realised the leash had slipped and tightened at some point, and that Gordon was no longer breathing. He had no pulse, and Brizzi was unable to rouse him. He told the jurors Gordon Semple had died in a state of erotic bliss. Both men's DNA was discovered on a leash in Brizzi's apartment. Brizzi's barrister attributed his behaviour to drug addiction and said that her client had little recollection of what had happened and was now utterly horrified. But the prosecution painted Brizzi as an evil and calculating man who intentionally killed Gordon Semple. They announced that a pathologist had discovered a deep wound had been inflicted on Gordon's face while he was still alive. They said, "You could have hit him with a hammer. Only you know what happened to Gordon Semple, and you did everything you could to make sure nobody would find out, because you chopped up his body and tried to dissolve it in acid, and dispose of it in circumstances that amount to cannibalism." A pathologist testified that while strangulation was a possible cause of death, it would have taken a prolonged period of pressure, rather than a momentary slip of the leash, as Brizzi claimed. Given the state of Gordon's remains, knowing for sure what happened was impossible, but Brizzi's earlier confessions and actions after the murder weighed heavily against him. The Breaking Bad plan, the hardware store, the calculated dismemberment, and his attempts to cover his tracks by leaving messages on Gordon's Grindr account. Then there was the cannibalism. Brizzi claimed not to remember consuming any part of Gordon, but an expert odontologist matched Brizzi's lower teeth to the bite mark on one of Gordon's ribs, proving he had tried to consume human flesh. This became an aggravating factor. On November 13th, after 30 hours of deliberation, the jury delivered its verdict with a 10-2 majority. Stefano Brizzi was found guilty of murder and was later given a life sentence, with a minimum of 24 years. For obstructing a coroner through dismemberment, he received an additional 7 years to run concurrently. The Met Police condemned him for showing no remorse for his actions at any point. He was sent to Belmarsh High Security Prison in London. In a statement after the trial, Gordon Semple's family said, Gordon was a loyal and much-loved long-term partner, brother, brother-in-law, uncle, cousin and friend to all. We were devastated when the news broke of Gordon's murder and the circumstances, which are still incredibly hard to deal with. It is still insurmountably upsetting. Stefano Brizzi was described as an atypical prisoner with a high intellect, who found himself frustrated by the limitations of prison life. And in early February of 2017, just 2 months into his sentence, Brizzi was found dead in his cell, having taken his own life. On his bed lay a will, letters to family and friends, and a note that read, "I die in peace." And that about wraps up this one. Gordon Semple paid the ultimate price for breaching the trust placed in him as a police officer, but no amount of poor judgment on his part shifts the blame from Stefano Brizzi, whose life is an unsettling reminder of the dark places where addiction, isolation and obsession can lead. Was he a monster, or was he a man consumed by his own demons? Let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you so much for stopping by and making it this far. If you found this video interesting or thought-provoking, please click that little thumb. And don't forget to subscribe for more. Until next time, bye for now.